Here with me now, one of the signatories to the brief, former Air Force Secretary Deborah Lee James. Secretary James, thank you for being here this evening. It is so important to read this amicus brief in particular, given the audience, of course, of the Supreme Court and the writers themselves. Let me begin here, Secretary James. Hypothetically, if Trump were granted immunity, that doesn't mean that the military is immune, right? So play this out. What would the military do if they were asked to carry out something unlawful by an immune president?
Well, first of all, Laura, thank you for allowing me to come on the program. My colleagues and I filed this amicus brief just because we wanted to emphasize with the Supreme Court, this is such a broad issue. There are many implications across the board, but let's not forget the important national security and military principles that are at stake here. There are certain principles that I'd like to just, if I may, briefly describe. First of all, civilian control of the military. It is embedded in our Constitution. The military acts not by itself, but under civilian control. Principle number two that's important here is the military must follow the president's lawful orders regardless of party. They are nonpartisan. They are supposed to be above politics, not follow a Republican president because they like Republicans or a Democrat because they like Democrats, but follow the president, all lawful orders. Now, here comes the answer to your specific question. Principle number three, the military is charged with disobeying an unlawful order, such as the instance you cited earlier, such as ordering troops within the United States to block the transfer of a peaceful transfer of power after an election, such as killing innocent civilians in warfare, the My Lai massacre in the Vietnam era. So failure to disobey disobey such an order could lead the military member themselves to be prosecuted. So the military would be in a state of confusion, number one, if many, many unlawful orders were being issued, what to do. And this kind of confusion is likely to lead to disarray.
I mean, the notion we hear about the commander in chief, and there is this, as you're describing it, this false perception that whatever is ordered by the commander in chief must be obeyed. But there is the guardrails that are in play. But on a case-by-case basis, you don't want the confusion among the military as to whether they're trying to decide which is lawful and which is not, which leads me to a big question I've been wondering about. I spoke to a voter a few weeks ago on this program who wanted to know where former presidents, former commanders-in-chief stood on this issue. You and your colleagues, at least 19 retired military leaders, have weighed in this amicus brief. Do you think that former presidents need to speak out in a formal fashion?
I would hope that they would. I would hope that they would. And the principle that in this country, no one is above the law has been a bedrock principle. And frankly, I never thought we would be worried about the president believing that he or she might be above the law. A few years ago, I wouldn't have even worried about this. But it is a major issue today. And I would hope that former presidents would weigh in.
You were very clear about the military only following the orders of commanders-in-chief that are lawful, but also not wanting to weigh into politics. We know that the body of these cases that are being brought against a former president, there is a lot of rhetoric surrounding them that people believe in some areas of the country and in political areas that it's partisan, that it's all partisan politics. Were you concerned about speaking up with your colleagues about this very issue for the fear of the perception that what you're doing would be viewed as political?
Well, sometimes you have to take a risk, Laura. And if you look at the 19 of us who signed on to this amicus brief and who have similar views, some of us have served in Republican administrations, some of us have served in Democratic administrations. The retired four-star generals and admirals typically have served both Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. And I personally have no idea, no one has any idea how they may or may not have voted. So we are a bipartisan, nonpartisan group, but we are like-minded and we all have had major years of service to our military and are very worried about the impact that this would have.
Really important to hear that perspective. You know, President Biden was actually asked about the biggest threat to democracy in a new interview. I want you to listen to what he had to say.
What, in your view, constitutes the primary threat to freedom and democracy at home?
Donald Trump. Seriously. Donald Trump uses phrases like, he's going to eviscerate the Constitution, he's going to be a dictator on day one.
Do you agree that he would be the biggest threat?
I don't know that I agree that he's a bigger threat than China or Russia, but certainly it is a threat when we start to say that someone with such enormous power as the President of the United States is above the law. Again, I come back to the principle, no one is supposed to be above the law.
Secretary Deborah Lee James, thank you so much.
Thank you.